All right.
All right. I'm back here in my seat in Washington, and today I got Lauri Nemetz here. I'm so excited. I just told her that I'm nervous because
No need.
no, I know you're beautiful. You're an amazing person, but I look up to you because you are. I mean, what you do is spectacular. So every time I met you, which has been in a lab, I've been so impressed every time. So I'm not nervous like that. I'm more excited, and I'm like, I look up to you because you are. I mean, the knowledge about anatomy is out of this world. So welcome, Lauri.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm so
How are you?
excited to be here. I'm doing okay. Considering our last few years for all of us,
Yeah.
I'm doing pretty well. Yeah, thank you.
Where are you right now?
Right now, I'm sitting in New York in the back room where I actually do some of my movement sessions via Zoom. So I'm in that space. My hair is still wet though, because I just came off the trail, because every day I'm on the trail doing, I think trail walking or trail running as part of my whole background too. So I was recently just on the trails in New York. So yeah.
Nice. Nice. So for anyone who doesn't know you, because I think you have to be a little bit of a nerd to know you, right?
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, that's fair, right? I
Yeah.
mean, so I met Lauri when I was dissecting in Tempe, right? Phoenix, outside Phoenix.
That's correct.
I think, and we discussed before we started to record this session that we think I've been there like 5 times.
Yeah.
And twice with Tom Myers and Todd Garcia, who is still like the master dissector, and yourself. And then I think it was once with just you and Todd. I need to mention Todd Garcia. He's incredible too.
He is.
Yeah, he is. And you guys together is like, wow. So that was the first time I met you. But again, every time I saw you work in the lab, I was like, all right. And so today we're going to talk a lot about fascia, and that was like the first time when I saw like a dead body, and I saw how it really looks inside. And so if you can just short explain before I'm going to introduce you more, the difference, because what we did, they call it fresh tissue, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And that's because like they just died, and it's more like an autopsy, right? Because there's still blood in the veins, and they got poop in their, everything's pretty real.
Everything's there.
Yeah, everything's there, but the nervous system, obviously.
Except it's the remains are there for sure. But yes, it's called sometimes fresh tissue versus, again, embalmed or formaldehyde-based different tissues. And sometimes you hear it that way too, embalmed or unembalmed. And usually that means too, somebody shortly after, and these are all donors, by the way, just so I make that really clear. Yeah. That's really important these days, I think, for everybody to know that these people really wanted everybody to learn from them. So these are donors, and sometimes they have a very specific reason why they donated their body. They have something interesting going on. But in any case, yeah, so it is, if it's fresh or, unembalmed, it usually is frozen shortly after they've deceased and then thawed out. So we actually have the mobility, the movement of the body still. And for those of us really into movement, which we are, it is so critical to see that and still see the body and the slide and the glide of the tissues on top of each other. Very different than formaldehyde, which of course will, keep it as a preservative for a long period of time for study, but you can't move that body the same way, and it doesn't look quite the same. So yeah, very big difference.
It's very different, and I think it has to be a lot easier if you want to really study anatomy, to do it that way instead of like the treated ones, right?
Yeah, it's different. I mean, I have a love towards, again, looking at it for movement based. Obviously, if you're looking at it long period of time, or you need to do very, very detailed dissection over a long period of time. You mean some of the work, that I've done with the fascia-system project, which we'll talk about more later, that had to be embalmed tissue because of the length of time we're working on it. So it's an interesting thing. They both have trade-offs, I would say, in a very different way for each. But, again, embalmed tissue just doesn't respond the same way that movement, can be introduced into the body in that unembalmed tissue. So, yeah.
Yeah, it was absolutely amazing. We might share a little bit more about that experience later. But first, I put some words down here that I read about you so people can know who you are and your brilliance. So this is what I came up with. So, Lauri Nemetz is a leading dissector in the field of myofascial anatomy, including fascial net plastination project, which we will talk more about.
Yeah.
Lauri conducts anatomy and movement workshops that integrate art history and science communication with sophistication and fun.
Woohoo!
Yep.
I actually do believe that one. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
You
and
gotta have fun.
I can sign under that one too. Totally. She's an adjunct professor at Pace University, having taught classes in yoga, myofascial anatomy, and more at Pleasantville, New York campus since 2004. And, okay, listen now. 2020 Pace U President's Award recipient for outstanding contribution.
Woohoo! Yeah, 2020 was a rough year for all of us, so I definitely was happy to get that one.
I can imagine. And in a few seconds, you're going to have to tell me what it really means. And the end of this text is, in the summer of 2021, Lauri was awarded the position of visiting associate professor at the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation for Rush University Medical Center in Chicago. She is also a licensed creative arts therapist and a member of the American Association for Anatomy.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. So now you guys, everybody that's listening now you know who I'm dealing with here, right? Another genius in my podcast. So let's go back to the start, like the plastination project. What is it?
Okay, that actually is an interesting thing that came out with some support from the Fascial Research Society. This was a project that also has been in collaboration with Body Worlds. Anybody who's ever seen, again, those plastinets, the really high-end plastinets that you may have seen in an exhibit or, in your anatomy university class, that comes from Body Worlds. And this was a collaboration that many of us tried to make happen for a long time over the years. I was one who wrote them. There was people like Tom Myers, Gary Carter, everybody else who kept asking them, hey, can we collaborate together in some way to show more of the fascia? Because they're brilliant at showing the muscular system, showing skeletal, showing all of these other things, the nervous system taken out. And it took kind of Robert Schleif to drive that. Robert Schleif, somebody in our field who really is great at collaboration and great at pulling people together. And that's what he did. He finally was the right person at the right time to pull it all together. And basically, we were a group of international volunteers from around the world. First stage of that project, we were doing individual pieces. And then the last stage of this whole project has been actually to do the full body plastinet, which has been named Freya, which is this fascia educating model that we are utilizing. And what's been amazing all along the way, there was so much that could have gone wrong, and yet it has succeeded brilliantly. And of course, it's not the only model of fascia out there. In fact, Freya, which is this full body plastinet, we were really careful to kind of highlight and show lots of different scenarios and scenes within a body to highlight what's kind of important in our system thinking right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's absolutely amazing. I saw a video that you were doing like a ghost kidney, right?
Yes, that's true too. That was back in the Anatomy Trains days. And actually, it was one of the things that led to this project, because I was one of the people that was looking at how can we take, it even came a bit from one of Tom's lectures about taking away everything except the fascia. What would that look like? And I'd heard about, there was a, pop science article about this Doris Taylor who was stripping out hearts and taking away everything except what we call the extracellular matrix. And it's a big, long name. It's part of, basically it's the scaffolding of fascia that everything else can be built upon again. So if you're doing a heart transfer, you might have a mechanical heart or an animal heart and then have to reseed it with stem cells. But how brilliant if you took the heart of a human, which has the shape that we want already, the scaffolding that we want, strip that away and then be able to reseed it so that it can be a viable organ. Now, what I did with hearts and kidneys, of course, I wasn't doing anything to do operating skills. That wasn't my goal. I just wanted to see, could we make this inexpensively too? And see, so I read a lot of the scientific papers and decided what would be the different actions to strip away different things. I don't know if like old style black and white photography where they used to go in the dark room and they had the chemical baths of one thing and then stopping the other. Right. That's kind of what I liken it to, because you have to, put it in a salt solution, but that breaks down the cell walls, but you can't keep it for too long or it would destroy it. Then you have to put it in something else that strips away the fat. That actually happens to be in a lot of shampoos that strips away the fat. Yeah, I went for the cheapest shampoo. I'm not going to reveal which it is, but the cheapest shampoo I could find because I knew it had a high level of sodium lauryl sulfate, which would strip this away. So basically, I kind of went through this whole process and repeated it several times through, and you get why it's called a ghost kidney or ghost heart is it looks white. It really looks like, and think about a kidney. You think of it being really red and everything else in there, but it has a lot of structure that is just fascial in nature. So it's really fascinating to see shape in the body that way.
And that's unbelievable. And do you think that will be the future, that we will do transplants like that?
They actually are thinking, like I said, I'm not on that end of things, but they are thinking it's not that far away and that could be a real viable way. Now, also 3D printing is out there, all sorts of other things as well. But there's also really interesting research there using things like spinach leaves to actually work for people for vascularization because of the pathways that, and if you think about a leaf, it has cellulose. That's kind of, that structure when it's right now it's fall in New York and everything's kind of falling apart. Those leaves are showing their fascial structure in essence. And that's a lot like what, so you can think about it that way.
I mean, I remember there was I have his name on my tongue, but probably you know it. The guy who did that ghost thigh when he took away all the muscle.
Oh, yes. And that was done by the computer graphics, and that was the Human Data Project. Oh,
Gary?
No, and
I know you know it.
I know it.
Yeah, me
I feel
too.
so bad. I feel so bad. It's totally gone out of my head, but it may come back to us. It will come back to us.
Yeah. So that's unbelievable. Okay, so that project, it's absolutely so interesting. Right. So as to end this, for anyone out there listening that is maybe not into, not a coach, not a PT, maybe an athlete that has never, especially in Sweden, has never heard of plastinate. If you can explain that a little, what is it in a simple way?
Yeah, really simply, basically, a lot of the body material actually gets infused through a process that's been developed by Dr. Van Hagen's to actually a plastic kind of substance. So that gets replaced, but in the form of the, original donor, plus again, positioning, the skillet, the dissector, everything else is feeding into that. But it allows for representation of seeing the body. And what's interesting to me, about this as well, historically, there's been different things like wax models. There's been different precursors to this so that people could learn. And oftentimes otherwise, the general public doesn't know a lot about what the inside of their body looks like. A lot of the athletes we work with, we're becoming so much more interested. I'm finding so many of the athletes I work with, on the college campus are now hungry for that. But it's really fascinating because basically what they've done is take dissection into kind of that Renaissance kind of art form, but using, again, literally a substance to infuse into the body so that you have that shape and have something that can be shown and is durable and is a teaching model in essence. So yeah,
that's incredible. I'm really happy you guys doing that because that's so interesting. Amazing.
Yeah, I got to spend many months in Germany to be part of that process and project, and fantastic collaboration between lots of different people.
Yeah, it's a couple of geniuses around that project. I know that. So
Yes.
that's why I know the results. So the end result's going to be amazing. So let's go back to that award you got in 2020, the President's Award, outstanding contribution in 2020. Anyone in this world needed an outstanding contribution in 2020?
Yes, as the
What
world
happened?
was
What did you
falling
do?
apart.
Tell me.
Yeah. Well, I actually just continued to try to do my best. Both, I'm very much involved in Pace University, both on the academic end, but also on the non-academic end. So next semester, I'm an advisor for the Body and Mind dorm, which has become a thing, which I think is great. These are things never were around when we were going to schooling. So these sorts of things are really interesting initiatives. And I teach a lot of also non-credit classes, particularly yoga or movement, especially for the sports teams, and am involved in different areas of campus life. So it's a combination of peer reports from other fellow faculty on teaching, from students, and feedback, both on the academic and non-academic end, that ended up getting me that lovely, recognition, which, like I said, I was proud of for 2020. I was like, it was a tough time to teach. And like I said, you're seeing me where I then started teaching all of my classes from here. I have a mat back there, I'm doing different movement stuff. But, I love seeing people in person too, but I also have figured out really well how to see through this lens too. And it becomes interesting. The value that I still see, I still have some of my classes online. There's been students, interestingly enough, who've still wanted that aspect, maybe financially, maybe convenience wise, maybe because of some, they're a little shy about doing movement with everybody else, whatever it is. Those have remained popular as well as being back on campus. And even for some of my clients, I can now see somebody who I saw in a workshop across, the pond or wherever it is, and get to work with them. And that's really fascinating. As you know, I know you travel all over the world as well to work with who you do, but it's sometimes nice to be able to have this kind of quick check-in.
100%,
yeah.
Oh, well, it's great, and you certainly deserve it. You're doing a great job. So I'm just proud to know you and be able to see you in action. So talking about, like, as we said in the beginning, we kind of took a deep dive. But let's go back to we're talking about fascia, and I've been studying fascia, whatever how you want to pronounce it. But I saw the other day actually on Facebook, I think I took my first fascia course 12 years ago.
Okay.
So I was pretty early with this. And then at 10 years ago, I studied in the US with, I lost his name too now. No, the guy who was working with Tom Myers and wrote Born to Walk.
Oh, James Earls. He's a friend of mine. Yes.
James is great. Sorry, James, if you listen to this.
We'll give him a shout out.
Yeah, he was in my group when we studied, and he worked with
Excellent.
Tom Myers at the time.
Uh-huh.
So this thanks to James that I actually signed up for the first dissection with Tom Myers.
Oh, okay. That's a
That's how it
nice
started.
connection. All
Yep,
right,
yep.
cool.
So
Cool.
actually, James was in Stockholm before we started study. He was in Stockholm to do a teaching, and we were supposed to grab a beer and have a chat. But I was working late, so I couldn't do it. But then we had a reason to start to talk when we got together in the US, and then we studied together for a year. So that was pretty
Fantastic.
cool. Yeah, and then I ended up in Phoenix doing in dissection, which was, I never thought I would do, but you know, what do you do
Yeah.
to learn more,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So, and I know you've been working with some of the best or smartest guys on the planet when it comes to fascia. And I know you know so much about this, but let's try to break it down so like any athlete or anyone that's listening to this can understand why is this tissue like why, first of all, what is it in a simple way? And then we can talk more about what it does. So what is fascia?
Well, it is a type of connective tissue, but not every connective tissue is fascia, because
Yeah.
we also have things like blood and, bone, which has become a little controversial, but I don't categorize it in fascia per se. But basically, we're talking about,
So you're in
the
Gil side or no?
yeah, sort of on that one. I mean, and we'll talk about layers and stuff again too. There's all sorts of controversy.
Yeah.
The reason why, for those of you who don't know out there, that bone was trying to be classified as fascia, it does have a lot of the same components. And this is what we're coming down to a little bit. The fibers, the glycoaminoglycans, which, again, you start to hear names like chondroitin and hyaluronic acid, which starts to become familiar to our athletic community. Water, whether it's bound, held in the tissues, or unbound, free floating, and all of that kind of the cells that are supporting the fibroblasts that make all of this. So basically, if you are looking, if you're making your chicken dinner tonight and you're looking at those white areas, that's your fascia on the broad sense. Those are usually the intermuscular septums, or the areas between large portions of the muscle. But we also have it on a really teeny tiny level too. So this is why a lot of people use the image of an orange. So if you have your orange, you peel off the skin, you see that white, and again, very much fibrous, cellulose type of tissue is very similar to our fascia. And if you peel your orange, and if you ever did this, maybe this is why I'm a dissector, you took the segments and then you retook the little teeny tiny segments and then did that.
Yep.
I think we all did that as kids.
We all did that, yeah.
That gets to the more finer levels too of fascia. So it wraps around in small areas, but it also is around these larger, broader areas. Traditionally, doctors have only talked about these really large, broad areas of tissue, like the thoracolumbar fascia or something like that. But we're starting to find that the connections are really important and interesting. We know this in athletics because if we train really rapidly, we know this, that the muscle will go faster than the fascia. And what happens? You get a fascial tear because the fascia isn't ready yet for that change. That's where we sometimes hear some of those numbers that keep getting changed around, but that muscle trains quickly, but fascia needs 6 months to 2 years to really remodel. Right. Starts right away, but it's, it takes time. So again, that's where I care about it, both for myself as well as athletes I've worked with. Depending how you train, if you only think about muscle, you're going to get injured. And what do we know about those fascial injuries? They hurt and they take a long time to heal. So this is important. If we want to have high level performance for a long time, we need to start thinking about how to train that fascia to be resilient and to be strong. Just like anything in the body, it can't be all one thing. You need, fascia. Sometimes they're like, oh, we need all sorts of mobility in the fascia. Yes, but you also need some stability. As we do running, plantar fascia has to have some strength in there too, to be able to do push off, those sorts of things as well. So we're starting to look more at that. A lot more people are looking at myofascia, which is muscle, myo, and fascia combined together. So that's where people like Tom Myers, some of James's work as well, has started to come out of looking at those connections. And there's many. I mean, I've studied, and was a teacher for Tom for many years. There's many other systems. He's done one of the most complete of mapping out some of these things. Yeah. They are starting to be looked at scientifically. What can we reproduce? What may be more a good thought idea than actual, science. But there's also other continuities that are being looked at by different PTs like Diane Lee and, all sorts of people. So it's becoming an interesting area to look at, but it's so relevant if we want to live well for a while, train well for a while. Really key.
Yeah, I think so too. And I'm sitting there thinking too, like, how come I reacted to that like 12 years ago already? Because there were pretty much not a lot of science back then. But for me, it just made so much sense when James explained everything to me too. First that class, because I was actually in Sweden too. But then when I met James and he talked about Tom Myers and he talked about the anatomy trains, that Tom Myers book, and I read that and I'm like, this makes a lot of sense, And I could be pretty smart when it comes to logic. And that was really logic. It was like, wow, this is something.
So, I think. I'm sorry to interrupt
no problem.
There.
You go.
And I'm freezing. I don't know why that is, but hopefully our sound isn't freezing too badly. Yeah, no, I actually, came across Tom's work, I think about the time the very first edition came out. So this was New York City. He did a body language course 20 something years ago. And it was the languaging of being able to think holistically. Sometimes that word gets a little bit abused and a little bit woohoo out there, but when we think of it like, well, of course, one thing is going to impact the other. That's kind of what we're talking about. And that makes sense. The models of tensegrity, or, where we see those old wooden struts and the rubber bands in between. And we notice, okay, one thing is going to affect something else. We all know that if we've ever gotten injured, your left knee is going to affect your, whatever, right hip, whatever it is. There is a connection that makes some logical sense when you start to follow, myofascial continuities of any sort. Yeah.
100%. So what do you think that, because this is obviously new science, and why do you think we have missed this for so many years? It's 2022 now, and the science is exploding right now, and it's 2022. How come? Why did we miss this, for hundreds of years?
Okay, well, this goes back to embalmed and unembalmed tissue. To me, a lot of this, because, and let's see, for you, well, we'll have your readers maybe, or your listeners look this up. But I'm going to show you an image that is this is from Boucherie that goes back quite many years ago. And this was pre-embalmed tissue, and it shows the fascial compartments. So at different periods of time, people were thinking about this. Some of our, ancient engravings, everything else, show continuities that we don't see so much in modern anatomy textbooks. So why is this? Well, again, when we got embalmed tissue for medical schools, it was like, yay, great. We can do this very individual pieces of looking at things. And that's the way medicine has kind of gone too, hasn't it? So that we look at these individual things. We label the muscles separately. We highlight it in a color. We can dissect it out as a separate entity. But we're not seeing the continuities. If you look back at Leonardo da Vinci, he did dissections and he looked at much more. He was interested in movement. We know this, right. In all sorts of levels. And he was looking at that as far as continuities. So there has been some of this before, and it goes back, further back. Those are just some fairly recent examples. But I think because medical schools went so much into embalmed tissue, went into parts naming, that we started to forget that the reality is that whole, we've just split it apart. You know, it's interesting because I am a dissector. I'm still splitting things apart. I'm just choosing to split them apart with a different viewpoint than we have sometimes before. Yeah.
Didn't call it like membranes before too, right? Instead of fascia. Was it on the Da Vinci era or was it later? They named it membranes instead of fascia, like compartments.
Yeah, there were some times that the languaging changed, and membrane, of course, being like that dividing wall. So we're thinking more of those, again, separating intermuscular septums, those big things in between. Fascia means to bundle, to wrap together several things together. So it's an interesting thing. We're still, and he got to, you know, saying, what is the definition of fascia? And let's break it down simply. We're still trying to figure that out, really. The definition keeps changing. That's why things like the Fascial Research Society gets together and they meet and they, you know, have big discussions and everything else. It's really fascinating. Anatomy, fascia, everything else is not as static as you'd think it would be. It's really changing quite rapidly, and especially in this world, about implications of how we use this for aging, how we use it for health. Obviously, there's been a lot going on with cancer research and movement and fascia. Dr. Helen Langevin is one of the biggest out there. That's a good name to look up if you're interested in there. But she's done, what I love is she's a mover herself. She practices yoga, but she took her, I forget if they were mice or rats, basically had them cling on to the table in basically a position they'll cling on and they'll be into up dog position. Those that did that simple stretch or whatever you want to call that repeatedly had less of this breast cancer showing up in their cells that they were looking at for this particular study. And she's looked at things too, like acupuncture needles. This is interesting to me too. I've only had acupuncture once or twice, but sometimes we have a lot of our athletes who try some of these different things. It does affect the fascia. The needle will pull in and twist, and we're actually creating a small movement stretch at a really teeny tiny level of the fascia. And that's actually interesting. And they show that can stimulate, that can make a difference too.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I saw a question with Gil Headley that you know well.
Yes.
And he was talking about scar tissue with I don't remember this guy's name, but it was a recent video on his website, and we were talking about scar tissue, and he got a question from the viewers about fascia and tattoos and acupuncture. Will that create scar tissue, and will that be good or bad for the fascia? And for what I could tell, he really wanted to respond what he wanted to say, but he was a little bit too scared to say it, I think. I don't know. But it seems like it will create some scar tissue under the skin.
Yeah, and how could it in some ways not? Because it does do, anything. But, if I take my run, I'm creating, micro insults to my body too that heal and whatever. So we don't know fully how much is necessarily harmful, how much is just a short-term effect. Certainly people have gotten tattoos for centuries and centuries as well. The interesting thing there is I've seen in dissection lab some of the early tattoos, the inks getting separated into different lymph nodes by color. Really? So there is a separation of maybe, I think the inks obviously used now are quite a bit safer, but the body's way of containing and saying, hey, we're going to take blue over here and do this over here.
That's unbelievable.
Body is really incredible. Really incredible. So
yeah, that's obvious. All right, so fascia is like, it's not really a connective tissue, but it is. And I think if you look at the critics out there, like the muscle people that only believes in muscles and muscle skeleton and this old way of looking at the body, and we all, of course, appreciate all the like the studies that's been done for hundreds of years because we've learned a lot from it too. But I think one of the reasons they will still make fun of us is that, as you said, we still haven't come up with like, okay, what is it really? So
Yeah.
that's they're using kind of that is like even they don't know what it is. So it's just bullshit. What do you think about that?
It's getting more out there now. Gosh, you mean, like I said, I'm a member of the American Association for Anatomy, and along with Dr. Rebecca Pratt, we co-led a symposium. First time there had been a symposium of that sort on fascia, and we kind of focused it in on pain. We had Antonio Stecco, we had Neil Thies, we had Helen Langevin, and we had a really smart panel of people who could bridge that gap, speak to that crowd really well and intelligently, but also that there is growing interest in this. It hadn't been there before. When I've guested over at Rush Medical, they're starting to be more and more fascinated by this because, again, the impact on physical rehab, really important. I was also did a workshop for a group of OBGYN and PTs related in that field, and they were also fascinated about some of these connections. Plastic surgery came after I did one dissection. Of course, they're interested too, because their outcome is, people are living longer and we want better outcomes for all of this too. But there is more interest. I think we've got to be careful on our end, those of us who really love fascia, to not go, yes, it's the cure all and be all, and I know everything about it. Yeah. I never pretend I know everything about it. I know a lot, but there's still a lot we don't know, and we're talking about it. But I think always, and this is a big thing for me, I'm interested in communicating across fields. It does no good. This is why, I love people like you who are in there with the high level athletes, and the ones who really get affected by all of this can change lives, can change careers, and any of us who work in different ways, if we can't make that leap of communication, it does no good for any of us.
Exactly.
And then, the other part of that too is, as much as I'm, yay, fascia, it isn't everything. Nothing is everything. It has to work all together, or it doesn't make any sense. Yeah.
That's so well put. Now you know why she's a genius. Oh, but it's so well put. I mean, it is, right? It's so many systems in our body that needs to communicate with each other, but no separate thing will, like, if I take, I'm going to start with vitamin C. I mean, that's all I'm going to do. That's all I'm going to change in my life. Okay, you will have zero change in your life, pretty much. Right. I mean, if you want to change in your life, you need to do more. So, because everything is connected to everything, and I think that's what intrigued me to incorporate like more movement-based training for athletes, because I myself got injured from heavy weightlifting, which is in other sports that's not good for you. Yeah. So in my head, like a while I'm playing pro hockey and I'm a weightlifter and I'm a long distance runner, and one elite sport is bad for you. I'm doing 3. Not good, right? No wonder I broke, and I was a mess mentally too, because on the teenagers and growing up is tough. Yeah. And then I ended up like with 3 disc herniation, and I woke up one morning, I couldn't feel my right leg, and I had to quit hockey. Mm-hmm. And my life was pretty much over, I thought, at that young age. Mm-hmm. So going back to thinking about the logic about this fascia is, for me, what's intriguing, and because everything is connected to everything, but it's not one thing ever that will change everything, because everything will have an input on everything. So if we're talking about, let's touch a little bit on athletes and training. So if this fascia is, as you say, it's fibers, and it's you mentioned extracellular matrix. That's outside the cells. So like kind of the fluids outside the cells, if you put it simple, right? And the fibers is a protein called collagen, right?
Collagen, yep,
Yeah.
of different types, yeah.
Yeah, different types of collagen, and we have there's a few, right? And then we have this fluid. So like the beauty industry, I think this is kind of funny, but the beauty industry recognized this like many
Oh,
years ago, right?
they yeah,
They
talk about
named
these
it.
all the time.
I
You
know, right?
know,
Like
they're
collagen and
like
hyaluronic acid, they're
hyaluronic
on it.
acid, they're on it because they want result. And
Exactly.
actually, this becomes a really interesting thing too. And as we find, a lot of it isn't so well taken up just by throwing it on our face or doing whatever, eating
No.
a ton of it. We're playing with all of these things. But what's interesting is, okay, so this is what makes you seem young and healthy. So think about that too. Athletes that are in, great shape and all of that too, they have oftentimes, they look, gosh, they look more water filled. They have, oops, I'm sorry, there's a phone call that's going on in the background.
No problem.
I was like, I have my headphones on. Hopefully you can't hear that too much. I'm like,
No,
okay.
it's all right.
But in any case, so you think about somebody like in the field of yoga, I knew Tao Porchon Lynch. She lived to 101. She looked beautiful. Some of this is genetics, but some of this is her moving well and playing with movement all of her life. She took up ballroom dancing in her 80s.
Wow.
This gives me hope when I'm like, oh, I'm in my 50s and I'm, tired and old. No, I mean, it's like you have ability to take on something new and take on new movement possibilities. And that really intrigues me as well. So, the beauty industry, yes, they know all the terminology, hyaluronic acid, everything else. Our athletes, glycosaminoglycans and chondroitin, and all of these things. But they are key to making us feel younger, more vibrant, healthy in that way. So it's interesting. Again, we can, even the very first Fascial Research Congress, most of the people who came to that first one came from meat scientists who actually were looking at how meat responds, to being healthy and how that fascia plays into that. So it's really, yeah. I kind of got diverted there, but that's interesting.
Right. No, yeah, it was perfect. Because if I look at myself and the way my brain works, it's like, because when sports starting to get faster and faster and faster, I'm like, okay, I need to get my athletes faster. And I thought to myself, okay, who's the fastest guys on the planet? Okay, track. So 100-meter track, that's the fastest guys on the planet. And when you look at track and field athletes, they are like this jumping, elastic human beings that always like bouncing around. And like, they're so gracious to look beautiful when they move. So I'm like, okay, if every track athlete is elastic, they have to do something with being fast. That was what I thought. Like, okay, so if I get my athlete more elastic, maybe they get faster. So as always, I tried on myself first, tried to bring in some more elastic recall work.
Yeah.
And I felt great. I mean, it didn't take that long either. Like, I felt great. And today, to be honest, I move better today than I did when I was 18. When I was 18, I could squat 500 pounds and I benched like 400, whatever. I was really strong in the gym. As I said, I was a weightlifter and a hockey player and a long distance runner, but I feel like my body feels so good when I get this elastic recall from everywhere. And now we know why. And when I started to do this with my athlete, they're like flying. They move so well. And it's not just jumping and stuff. Like, we do it with the whole body. We use a lot of bands that has elastic recall in it, and we work a lot with that. And I mean, the results is incredible.
Absolutely.
Absolutely incredible.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and I know like Dr. Robert Schleib talks a lot about the elastic recoil and training like end range of motion to
Mhm.
doing different stuff to have this fascia healthy and get stronger and stronger. Because someone told me, I know this is still true, you can verify, but some say that collagen fibers, the fascia collagen fibers are stronger than steel. Some of them.
Yeah, there's this whole thing about how incredibly strong and resilient they are when they're, healthy. So
Yeah.
yeah, that gets utilized quite a lot. Yeah, and same thing. I mean, I started to play too with a lot of the different fascial recoil in both workshops I was teaching, but playing with it, even from like modern dance sequences and then jumping, but then jumping in a different direction each
Yeah.
time and playing with it in different playful ways. I've gotten back out to oftentimes taking out my jump rope too, just as a old school type of way to start
Yeah.
to build that in, but then play with different rhythms. I think that's the key too with fascial training is you're playing with speed. You need both fast and slow. You
Yeah.
need both hard and soft. You need, dynamics in all directions. So, even though we have these anatomical directions, which are a great place to reference and start, we then start to play with everything in the in-betweens, so that we can actually really get resilient to anything that comes up in life. This comes to, some of the people too, like Michel Delcour's work, where he's
Yeah.
training too with Viper. Of
Yeah.
course, he was looking at, again, people on the farms are doing much more, much more resilient in their hockey playing than the people who trained on the gym machines. Well, why? Because every time's a slightly different load, slightly different vector. And
Yeah.
as we know from anybody who does running, you can't run fast all the time either.
Yeah.
Interval training is actually really important to actually build you up stronger. And
Yeah.
this is really fascia loves variety, I would say, is kind of a big overall statement in terms of movement. Yeah.
Yeah. So that coming back to what I said before about this side, the muscle side of the community and the fascia side of the community, that again is like there's no structure in their training. They're just all over the place. And I can see that why they say that too, because we train a lot of, as you said, at different speeds and at different, we have different planes, we do so many different things just to strengthen the fascia all over. So I can see why they say that too. So my question to you is this. You mentioned fibroblasts. So fibroblasts is what makes the collagen fibers, right? So, and it create the fibers or start to build the fibers where we move, right?
Yep.
So can the fibers get strong enough by being like always changing, movement, focusing on movement variability, if I put it like that? Can it get strong enough? Because if you like the regular or traditional way of training, muscle training, you're doing, you're sitting in a machine or you're doing back squat or whatever. It's just you're training one muscle or two muscles.
Right.
Single joint training, something like that. And you said too, like it takes 6 months to up to 2 years maybe to strengthen the collagen fully. So can we like have too much movement variability so the tissue doesn't get strong enough? And how do we think about it when it comes to, because that's a tricky one, right?
That is a tricky one, but I love that you ask these sorts of questions because I think it is true. We've got to think about how to intelligently bring this in, because I see a lot of people, like especially I'm doing a lot in the yoga community. Who's attracted to the yoga community is these people that are hypermobile who don't have as much collagen fibers naturally in their system. And instead of strength training, they are doing end range flexibility beyond, but not being spatially aware.
Yeah.
And even for myself, because when I started kayak guiding, kayaks are heavy. My kayak unloaded is 55 pounds.
Oh, wow.
Loaded is a lot more.
Yep.
And you got to learn how to rescue, and you got to learn how to do these things. And for me, I was very much had a lot of mobility, but I needed more strength training. So I really started doing much more weight training, to also, but also even within yoga practice, I started to go for the arm balances, the controlled things in there. You know, I can go into a forward fold, usually no problem, but that doesn't serve me well, you know, at the end of the day, if I'm achy. So it's working intelligently also for your own body system within it too, I think is really important. And yeah, absolutely. We can go to the, you know, free, crazy movement that isn't doing us favors either. You know, again, Robert Schleip is just such a good one to look at for a lot of this information. I'll shout out Jan Vilke too, who's another researcher, really great in sports. Really super nice guy too. So it's always good to shout out those people.
Love it.
But both of them talk about too. I mean, Robert will talk about healthy fascia, you know, looks like one of those wine bottle or orange, you know, bag meshes. And if you think about that, that has structure to it, but it has a lot of room for variability and strength. But it can't be completely wild. If you get an injury, as you know, and you knit that, you know, injury around, that can create all sorts of other little issues around it. So we're looking to create some organization, but within that organization have the possibility for movement.
Yeah. So it's a tricky question. It's really,
yeah,
I mean, it's going to depend on a lot, right?
It's going to depend on a lot.
Yeah.
The person, and that's why it's tricky to say, yeah, this is our regimen that we're going to give to, you know, somebody who wants to do, you know, I mean, like a kayak program.
Yeah.
I look at who is the body in front of me, because, you know, they may need something different. They may need to really access internal, external obliques much more than they're doing, but somebody else may need to, you know, think of pelvic position. So, you know, we have to kind of throw it all together and also look at who we're seeing in front of us. It's really important.
So true. So in a simple way, maybe you can put it like this, that if you're like really like hypermobile, like a yoga guy, if you like yoga, you're probably mobile or hypermobile. Maybe you need some more strength training.
Yeah.
And vice versa. So
and vice versa. Yep. And we're starting to see more of that. We're definitely starting to see more of that as people are finding their way into it. But sometimes prejudice against what's you know, appropriate movement for so and so gets in the way of people getting to what they need. You know, so we've got to work intelligently with all of that.
Oh, totally. And I think because I haven't used a barbell at all in over 15 years for my athlete, and they're still super, super strong and super fast and move really well. So we can make them strong anyway. But I think if I look at like a traditional hockey, the way I trained too, and the way I moved and the way I walked, the way I looked back then at 18 years old, you can tell from a distance that I was a hockey player.
Right. And I still could. Remember the first time I met you? I mean, before I knew how, you know, big you were in your field, I was like, do you play hockey?
Right? It's still there, right?
It's still there. But
Imagine how many hours of hockey I spent. And then from that, go into the same position at the gym and put a lot of load on my neck. And I mean, there's no wonder I broke down, right?
Right.
So everyone wants to be healthy. Yes.
And I think, well, I was going to say, but what you have, and I think too, I'm seeing much more in the sports community these days, is people have curiosity, you know, and that's what drives us to, you know, leading great lives in whatever way, both performance wise, but otherwise, because as you said, there's also an emotional, mental piece of all of this, as we know as well. Yeah.
So that's what I want to get into a little bit more, because we know the fascia system or the fascia tissue have a lot of sensory nerves in it. And so it's a sensory organ, right?
Mhm.
So means that so let's put it a simple question first. If I have like an injury or a trauma, which is kind of the same thing, but it can be an injury in your sport, or you can be maybe a car accident, or you fall on your
Mhm.
bike or whatever it is. It's a kind of trauma for the whole system, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, do we have to work with like the traumatized aspect of the incident first, or can we go to like starting to do hands-on fascia treatment right away and movement right away? I know it's a hard question. It's another hard question.
Mhm.
Sorry, but I mean, I have seen so many traumatized people coming to me that is in pain, and they think I'm going to put my hands on them and give them the treatment because when Andreas do treatment, he's unbelievable. He's magic, blah blah blah. But they have so much trauma in their bodies, I can't touch them because I will put more stress
Right.
on them, right?
Right. Right.
So it's just tough. Where do we start, and where do I know whether it's injury on the ice, let's say, or
Mhm.
because that will hockey players are used to be hurt, right? They used to be in pain,
Yeah.
so they will not care as much. And maybe another athlete that plays in other sports that doesn't get injured as often and are not used to pain. These will be different approaches, right? For
Yeah, definitely.
and
Definitely.
what happens when, so my question is really what happens to the whole system of fascia in a trauma like an injury, or it could be a mental trauma too.
Right. And that's kind of interesting because actually my first career right out of grad school was as a movement therapist, dance movement therapist, creative arts therapist. So, and I still keep up my licensing with that. And it's something, I worked with trauma survivors for a while. I worked
Oh
post
wow.
9/11. I worked all sorts of um, different need populations. And this is actually what got me interested in anatomy in an
Oh,
interesting
nice.
way, because what I saw manifested in a lot of the bodies that I was working with didn't fit the anatomy atlas. And I was
Yes.
curious why. So, the body positioning, how people manifest that is just something really interesting. It's hard because again, I really want to caution people, you can't read people like tea leaves. You can't go, okay, this body type means this, absolutely. No, there's a lot of things that go into it. But like you said, it also depends on the athlete, the kind of the sport, because there's a certain type of personality that's attracted to different sports. We all know this. And working with all of that too. But pain, injury to something that affects the athlete is an identity issue. A lot of times general public doesn't get that on that level, that it becomes something that takes away from who you feel you are if you're injured.
Right.
So it is kind of a double trauma, just both, like I said, mentally and physically, and it manifests and can feed into the whole body system. There's a whole lot we still don't know yet about chronic pain and how it manifests and what might be the mechanism going on as far as some of the mental manifestation of that. But there seems to be a piece of that in there. Um, Interestingly enough, you mentioned lower back pain before. There's a lot of lower back pain that is not explained very well, just by pure injury. We know there's a lot of sensory nerves in thoracolumbar fascia. It's a big, broad area. So it also might, like I said, I'm not going to say anything is absolutes, but
No.
it might be that oftentimes that's why so many people, besides posture, besides other issues, may be having chronic lower back pain. There may be some mental piece in there as well, because it is a highly um, innervative area of sensory nerves. But again, a lot we don't know yet that we're just trying to figure out. But it makes sense. It makes sense these things are connected.
Yeah, and it makes sense too. Like if you have a trauma or you feel like, let's say you're an athlete and get injured, and as you said, you will affect your mentally as well. You will be maybe a
Mhm.
little bit depressed, and you will move less and train less, and maybe even start to eat a little worse and not as
Yeah,
healthy, and maybe sleep, or I mean everything gets in the bad
everything
circle.
connects. Yeah,
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 and that will be like it's tough to step back into the field or to the ice, whatever sport it is, without thinking about the whole again. I think thinking about the mental aspect of everything, like if you are a little bit depressed, because I think many people right now out there seem to, I think seem to be like, I don't know if it's just social media that does this, but it seems like the world needs more happiness and love right now.
I agree.
Right?
Yeah.
So many, look at the internet, people are like just crushing other people. There are so many trolls and shit. It's people just hate. uh that has to be huge on the fascia system and the body. It's just, people are ripping people apart
Yeah,
online.
they really are. I sometimes periodically go through social media cleanses because it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I'm digesting something that isn't healthy for me otherwise. And I think there's an interesting piece of that too with the last couple of years. A lot of people limited their outside activities. And this is sometimes an issue of accessibility. I was lucky. I live in an area I still could hop on a trail, even in the worst part of the pandemic, and get out there for 2 hours and, be in nature and be disconnected from the rest of the world's news and be present. But a lot of people there are, during lockdowns, during whatever else, didn't have that, made their movements smaller, made it more concentrated on, media and everything else. And that plays, really strongly with emotionality too. So, yeah, a lot can be helped by getting out there and moving,
Right.
bottom line. But in reality, like I said, the last couple of years has made it sometimes an accessibility issue, which is why I'm always really interested in environmental space too, how we utilize not only the way we design athletic fields and equipment and whatever, but how we, negotiate through parks and everything else. As you well know from traveling so much, different parts of the world look really different, and people move through those different parts of the world really differently. And some of those are healthy and some of those not so much, that feed into it. So I think that's an important piece as well.
Yeah. Beautiful. So go back to fascia, and so we know we have fibers now and collagen, and we have the extracellular matrix, so the fluid, so to speak. And we know that elite sports are not healthy at all. Not moving at all is not healthy at all. So elite sports are bad for fascia and for everything pretty much. And but it's fun like health. We always gonna play it. And not moving at all is as bad for the body or for the fascia, right? So tell us a little bit what happens like with the viscosity in the fluids while not moving enough or when doing too much.
Okay, so that's a really interesting point. And it's always those two extremes that usually lead to problems. We know for like hip replacement surgery, it's the people who've done a ton or have done nothing that get those hip replacement surgeries. The middle of the road people more or less, have a better shot at doing okay and getting through without that. So it becomes a really interesting thing. Yeah, there's a lot that comes into play with viscosity and things like hyaluronic acid and how that works. Things too that really become important in a lot of our communities is things like plantar fasciitis and itis or an inflammation and how that responds. Obviously, this is an area that's a big concern for a lot of athletes. And we have to go too, if it's been too aggressively done, again, we get into micro tears, we get into tears of fascia too. If we don't utilize it enough, there's not enough ability to negotiate, how the big toe moves, that this is part of the reason, and this is an interesting thing to me too, that shoes have become so over-engineered and built. we can't go completely barefoot in modern life. We need, we have concrete, we have things that just didn't exist. We have things in New York. I wouldn't want to go into the city and walk barefoot.
Nope.
Or you mean in some of my barefoot shoes in the city. So there's that, but there is more that we have to play with some of that variability. And even, sad to say, I have to get in my car to usually get to the trail to do my walk and run. I'm on a very busy road, but I will keep in my car at all time, usually like 5 pairs of shoes that I will change out to make sure that we're not, I'm not getting too used to one type of surface, one type of whatever, that I change and basically exercise my foot in different ways, but not all at once. If I've had, an injury, I can't go, I can't go from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
You've got to go and make that change slowly, gently. There's more that Antonio Stecco is doing actually with a lot of that, looking at viscosity and hyaluronic acid and how that also plays into functionality in terms of pain and injury. So I point people to that work. I point people again to Jan Wilke, who does just quite a lot in sports and movement with that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. Because I think too, like going back to my injury with hockey, I was playing hockey like flexed so many hours. And then after training on ice, I went home and I played outside on the streets, playing street hockey, right? Pretty much in the same position again.
Yeah.
And then when I grew up a little bit and I got 15, 16, I started to lift, I'm back in that squatting forward flex position again. And so we're talking about the viscosity, what will happen in Mar, you mentioned the thoracolumbar fascia, which is like, as you said, a broad, a big, how do we say in English? Easy.
Broad area.
Broad tissue, broad area of tissue over the lower back. And so if I'm doing that extensive work, first on ice, then street hockey at home, and then at the gym flex, all I do is pretty much flex. And that's why I walk like I probably still walk. You can still probably tell that I'm a hockey player. So imagine the viscosity in my lower back would probably very dense, right? And that could create a lot of pain from what I understand.
It can. And, and there's a fine line here too, because sometimes we, obviously we assume certain positions, certain sports, we can't take that all away. There's an advantage, obviously, to that forward flex position. But can you create a little bit more variability in there? So there's possibility that when you do something sudden in a different way, that it doesn't injure immediately. And that's kind of the key.
Yeah, that's true. So we talk when I do talks and stuff and teach, I talk a lot about like tissue tolerance, that you have to build tolerance over time.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. And that's it was a fun episode on TV a couple of years ago. It was a trainer that was explaining how to shuffle snow. So he said you should not rotate, like shuffle and rotate, because then you fuck up your back, which is true. If you never train like that, because you don't have the tissue tolerance for that, right?
Right.
But if you've been training like that, like med balls and stuff at the gym, your body are used, you have the tissue tolerance to be able to rotate, then it will be no problem shoveling snow in the same, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think that was just because the way he showed it, how to do it was just squeeze your core and be like a robot. And it was just hilarious. But he was right though, because most people doesn't train in rotations. So all of a sudden you're going to shuffle a lot of heavy snow in rotation. I mean, your back's going to give up.
Yeah. And it's an interesting thing because when I teach people how to kayak, that, people get over, their shoulders hurt or their arms hurt if they haven't learned how to, again, take advantage of that rotation. So we have to think of who we're talking to when and what they're used to and how to kind of move that a little bit further along. So good Good
Yeah, so
stuff.
talk about, so every we touched a little bit on injuries now, so we need like a healthy fascia. So if you're doing a sport excessively, you're doing that a lot, we need to incorporate some variability training to that to
Mhm.
have a healthy fascia. That would be a good way to put it, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay, good. So if we're talking about performance, uh, we touched a little bit of elastic recall. So maybe we're doing a lot of strength training. We do a lot of interval running and stuff like that. So maybe so it's a good thing to incorporate a little bit more of the elastic work for pretty much any
Mhm.
athlete, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because it also, when you train that, you can do more with less. Isn't
Yeah,
this like the thing we all want? Even as a
saving.
kayaker, when I started to get into doing this more, I wanted to go longer for less effort. I didn't want to have to effort so much. And people laugh, but I told them that's why I got better technique wise, because I'm lazy in some ways. I want to do
Humans
more
are
for
lazy.
less.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
we're supposed to save
We're
energy.
just very high intensity lazy.
Yeah.
That's an athlete in essence.
Well,
But it's true. But so that elastic recoil too, the more you train that into body system, that's those elite runners that you were talking about too, who look like they can just glide.
yeah.
And I remember the first time I watched the New York City Marathon live, I was in a friend's apartment and we went down the stairs, and already what we saw on TV from like the bridge coming down, they were just flying by, and they
Right?
just very, very little efforting, but
Yeah,
that's been trained into the body system. So it's a really, yeah, it's an interesting thing, but it can be done. It can be
yeah.
learned. No.
100% yes. And I think that for me, the shocking thing that I was not expected, maybe if I was smarter, maybe should have seen it coming, but like as you said, the movement efficiency, when I created that elasticity and elastic recall in my athletes, they moved so much better, and like they saved so much energy, like you said, like
Yeah.
they were so efficient all of a sudden too, and we could train
Mhm.
harder and longer and use less energy, which is
Yes.
absolutely
Yeah.
amazing, right?
Yep.
And they'll
Absolutely.
probably set us up for a little lower risk of injury as well, I guess.
Right, right. And I think that's why it's interesting to me too. I've been watching people who have done Ironmans and those sorts of things as well. There's a larger, longer part of the population that's coming into those sorts of trainings, and older, are
Yeah,
able to do that because they're training for that efficiency, which is really fascinating to see. Yeah.
yeah. And I think I read a study about why kangaroos can jump so far, right? You know that
Yeah,
one?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Tell us about that. Because how come they can jump so far? Because first they thought they had a lot of type 2 fast fibers, but they didn't.
Yeah, it's not muscular action at all. It's the
No.
fascial recoil.
Yeah.
And that's Saul Wiki or Saw, yeah, one of those has done one of the big studies on that. So that, they're kind of, they do also what we call the catapult action,
Yeah.
so that they can, again, be very efficient in those jumps. They don't utilize a whole lot of energy as much as we would think they were, because we, initially anatomists were looking at all of their muscles and going, wait a second, it is not the muscles that's doing this. This is fascia, and they're expending very little energy. And this is something that's come across several studies, is kind of what we're starting to get into too. James Earls too, and Born to Walk, has talked about this too, about sometimes the women who are carrying the large loads on their head, that there's been studies by Zorn who discovered they're not actually expending any more effort in that carrying of a heavy load. They've just learned how to distribute that strain throughout the fascial system and carry on with that so that they're more efficient. And again, that's kind of what we want.
That's unbelievable. But would you say that muscles are more like a stabilizers? Or what do you think?
They,
What's the muscles like? We've been believing in so many years that the muscles doing everything, and now we're telling muscles not doing anything. What muscle they do, right? So what
they
are like
do.
them? Yeah, they do. So tell us a little about what does a muscle do we say in the fascia, it's all fascia that makes us jump so far and to able to balance that thing on the head. But muscle has to have some function.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, some of what's interesting is to look at it in terms of the fascial pockets that they sit in. So sometimes, too, an action of a muscle engaging can be pushing that fascial area and actually amplifying that movement into other areas. So there's some of that that's starting to be studied more. Again, James is somebody who really has gone into some of this area much more than I have. But I find that interesting too. So yes, we are engaging the muscles, but there's a translation of what's going on to the fascia as well. And then if you think about it, if your fascia is stuck together, if those compartments that you saw so beautifully in dissection lab are not sliding and gliding, that's going to limit our ability and possibility of, movement fully in any case.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And that's when we start to move somewhere else, right?
Mm-hmm,
So we can't move
exactly.
here, we move over here, and then we move over here, and
Something gives.
something gives, yeah. And then something will give up and say, nope.
Yes, exactly.
And that's an injury right there.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
that's amazing. I think this is just so inspiring. So going back to, so let's say, let's make a tip for athletes now, because I know it's a lot of athletes are listening to this. Many trains in teams and still doing traditional lifting.
Yeah.
What can they do and when can they do it just to have like trying to have a healthy fascia so they will not break down, have like unnecessary injuries? Can they do something like, should they do it in the morning? Should they do some stretches? Should they do yoga, something else? Or just to warm up different every time? Can they do it prior to practice or prior to game? How often? Do you have any recommendations for what can they do, like to be a little bit healthier if considering the fascia?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question. The timing of things, I think, becomes important. And it's also always for what sport becomes really important, and what type of stretch. We know there's many different types of stretch, dynamic stretch, all these other things. That's where I point people to Chris Fredericks. He's done a lot of work with Anne in Stretch to Win, but a lot of his books explain that smartly as far as stretch style, because it matters. I wouldn't want my football players, who I oftentimes work with post games or everything else, necessarily do a full out yoga session right before the game. However, dynamic movement, yes. So we're talking about for what, when becomes really important. We're starting to get a little bit more sophisticated. We're learning because, again, how people have gotten injured in the past and what makes sense now. But I would point people to some of that work too, because I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think too. And so if we know that everything is connected to everything, so I guess recovery, sleep will be important for this. I guess
Sleep is absolutely important. If we don't rest and recover, we can't, even all those micro tears that we know that we do all the time, that can't heal and recover if we don't give it time to. I think people are becoming really a lot smarter in, again, we've started to have weight days, we've had non-weight days, we've started to mix that in, but also the type of interval training that we might do on a given day versus another day. That really makes a lot of smart sense to me too. So that we're, again, mixing up the body system with some intelligence of design in there too. So that, like you said, it's not just anything goes.
No,
That's not good either.
No,
That doesn't work.
No, that doesn't
We need
work
some
at all.
structure in there. Yeah, we need some structure in there. So yeah, I would point people to, Chris Frederick's work as far as stretch in terms of fascia before things. I think he's done some of the best research in there for some of that work with stretch in athletes.
Yeah. So if let's say because I'm a big guy on recovery, I usually say like, how little can we train for optimal development? And I'm not saying it's going to be little, but I mean, how little can we train? We want to be on the edge so we can have maximum recovery. So that's when we develop, right?
Right.
So if we train very similar, every day, which many, many people still does. Um, and you say that building fascia, it's tough. Could it be a good thing to do the same thing every day, every day, every day, every day, if you want to build strong fascia faster? If you know what I'm thinking?
Yeah, I kind of get where you're going with
Yeah.
that. I mean, like I use my trail time as my kind of baseline training, quote unquote. But then there's some days that I will do trail running. Then there's
Yeah.
days I will do the weight stuff in there. There's days I more dedicate to my own yoga practice in there. But that the walking, you know, if we do intelligently, can be a baseline in there all the time to keep
Yeah.
developing. And that too, for me, has kept, you know, fascial resiliency and, you know, work for my feet and everything else that is in there. But we do need that downtime, whether we're talking about, you know, again, sleep or longer periods. One thing that I find so interesting is so many people are now wedded to their fitness apps. And, you know, it's great. It's great to know roughly how many miles you're going, steps, whatever. But the step indicator was designed by, you know, a company that it was a good trick. It was a good name to market that 10,000 steps. So that's kind of what became standard. You know, if you're sick, if you've had COVID, you're going to have to change your, you know, training schedule and allow for a more intelligent, longer period of rest and recovery. And most people don't listen to that. So I guess I would say too, there's a need to do that. As far as going all along, I do something every day. You know, like I said, the walking is my to go, and it's usually 4 to 6 miles daily for me, as just as the kind of baseline that I move
So
everything
like
else off of.
mild movement every day will be beneficial. But if you like doing hardcore stuff, same thing every day, that we just break the tissue down and eventually you get
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So so sleep is obviously key to pretty much everything. We talk about nutrition, food, supplements and stuff like that. Would that affect how the fascia? I mean, if you talk about sugar would be a big thing, I suppose.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out sugar in relationship to fascia. The key names again are the things like the chondroitin, that becomes a big thing. Collagen in terms of things like even bone broth, which is interesting to me. Like I said, even for myself, if I've had a hard run, I'm much more inclined to drink something like bone broth than go for a sugary drink. We don't know exactly the science yet of how much of that is synthesizing. There's been some work starting to be done under that nutritional piece out of some of Robert Schleip's latest books of fascia and movement. So I'm really curious to hear if that develops further. Right now, it's not conclusive if we can do it. But like anything else, what we feed ourselves is going to affect ourselves. So we know the healthier the food, obviously, the better we can process this into everything else that we need. Sugar is not such a great thing in our body system, period.
Yeah. So would you say that the more sugar we eat, like bad food and candies and cookies and stuff, would that create more like gluey kind of fascia, you think, that will not slide and glide as well as a healthy diet? Could that impact?
But what's interesting is we know that it creates an inflammation response. And also unhealthy fascia has an inflammation response too, that we've been seeing in some of the research. So there's, you know, don't necessarily know if we can connect the dots so strongly yet, but anytime we can lessen inflammation in the body system, better. However, having said that, you know, I have friends who are elite, you know, runners who that quick sugar, a Pop-Tart before they take their long run actually does fuel them and, you know, is needed. So we can't take away everything. It's like everything else, it's all in balance. Plus you got to enjoy life a little bit too. 100%. So, you know, there's that aspect of everything else in there too.
But there's just one problem to this, and this is just maybe for a small percentage of who's listening to this, like if you want to be a pro athlete, or if you are a pro athlete,
Mm-hmm.
you can't, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's not a lot of cheating you can do. You have to be like every, especially,
Pretty.
yeah.
Yeah. Pretty
But
high.
for us, it's more for us. We can cheat a little bit.
We can cheat a little bit. You guys can't. but just to think about in terms of inflammation, what does cause that system to have that inflammation response? And I think those are the types of things we're really looking at avoiding. And what we can feed into the system, like I said, research is starting to investigate. I'm really interested in things like those, the collagen, the bone broths, what that's going to do down the line. But we don't know yet for sure. Yeah.
For sure. No, because I read that too, that like collagen, hydrolyzed collagen with vitamin C would be beneficial for healing
Right.
faster, right?
Right.
So I
And
guess
it's
there's
the
been some
key
studies,
with,
but
yeah, with the vitamin C is
yeah,
important to actually have it synthesized correctly.
yeah,
So yeah, you need those combinations. And that's where nutritionists, I don't know how interested they are yet in fascia, but I'm hoping they catch on with all of this too, and then can help inform the rest of us as well.
yeah,
Because
exactly.
that's a
No,
really
because
important.
I'm doing a collagen and like 2 times 15 grams a day for injured
Yeah.
athletes, plus like 10 plus gram vitamin C a day if you're
Yeah.
injured. And this seems, I don't know, because I can't exactly know because I haven't been rehabilitating exactly the same athletes
Right.
with the
Right.
same injury at the same time in their life. So it's not 100% accurate, of course, but it seems to be, I've been doing it for a few years now, and it seems to be speeding up recovery and make them stronger, faster.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't know, but that's what my sense is. So we'll see. I'm looking forward to. I think the conclusion is going to be that it does help. That's what I think.
Yeah.
From
Yeah.
my
I mean, that's been kind of my feeling too. I just, like I said, I'm cautioning saying it because, I can't
yeah,
speak to
I get
that with any absolute authority, but I'm curious. I have a curiosity with that too. Yeah.
yeah. So let me put it this way: can anything bad happen? So let's say we do supplement with collagen and vitamin C. Could anything bad happen with it with a fascia, if you have
As
like good quality stuff, of course?
As far as I knew, not. And this is where a nutritionist comes into play, because there are certain vitamins that will build up in the body system, but there's others that your body just flushes out if it's not utilized.
Yeah,
And that's my sense with collagen, the extra vitamin C, is that whatever isn't being utilized and uptaken is just out of there in the body system anyhow.
yeah,
That's where, yeah, get a smart
yeah,
nutritionists on here, and maybe they can tell you more because they know, again, what can remain in the body system, because there are some vitamins you can overdose on. So
totally. Yeah,
yeah.
100%. Well, this has been amazing. And you asked me before, like, how long should we do this? And I said, like, yeah, usually it's between 20 minutes and like 1:45. I think we're up to like 1:45. Almost. I don't know. But it's been, I mean, we need to do another one, I think, because we could talk forever about this. So,
Absolutely.
going back to, let's just to conclude the whole almost 2 hours. Fascia is like a new thing, and that's not a new thing, but it's growing now. People get more and more aware. We actually had one of our most famous soccer players in Sweden history. His name is Fredrik Ljungberg. He was in primetime television on, I think, last Saturday, and he got a question. It was something about an injury on a player, because he's like a commentator now. He retired like
Great.
years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah.
And he said, yeah, it might not be a muscle injury. Maybe it's the fascia. It's a new thing now.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. Good
So
to
it's
hear.
spreading. It's
It
spreading.
is spreading. Good,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, that's a good thing. So do you have anything you want to add to this, like for people to take home, like a take home for the listeners, to having a healthy
Um,
fascia, or something else you think about?
Well, having, like I said, the curiosity around it all, I think, is useful. So if you start to get interested in it, dive into more of the articles. There's lots and lots of different things out there, mainstream as well as more into the nitty gritty. So, you know, there's a lot that you can take a look at. Schleip, like I said, Jan Wilke's work is really great. Yeah, there's more out there that's coming out there, and to also start to visualize it, which is part of the thing of the whole Freya project. I'll do this even though I never
Yeah,
do this.
no, I was supposed to just say that. This is the
You're
first
gonna
copy, right?
introduce. Yeah, this is my first coffee that I got. I have just published, it's coming out officially December of this year, but the myofascial system in form and movement. It is a kind of a visual, it gets in there a little bit more into some of these different categories, has a bit of movement from different sports, but it's kind of also, you know, picture book in there too. You can kind of take in bits and pieces of it or read the whole thing through. Yeah, that's one of the things I've been up to lately.
Yeah, so say the title again, because not everyone's going to see this on YouTube. Somebody will just listen.
Yes. Myofascial system in form and movement. And it's available on Amazon and all those good things. So we'll
Right
put
now?
a link, or I think you can pre-order it right now.
Oh, you can pre-order now. Okay.
Yeah,
if you
paperback.
get the first one today,
Yeah, it's gonna coming out there. So, but
so
yeah.
what I know you're a genius. So what's the do you have to be a nerd to read that?
No, in fact,
again,
I kind of really like cross communication.
Yeah.
So there are places that are dense in there. There's other places you can skim the pictures and just get inspired. I have two, you know, the pictures with the permission of the Plastinarium and the Fascia Plastination Project. We have the pictures of Freya. I have that ghost kidney in there. I have some other things from the Fascia Plastination Project. So, you know, if you're the visual type of learner, which a lot of us are, you can kind of flip through and just look at it in that way and grab bits and pieces of it. If you want to dive in deeper, I have a lot of guests who wrote little bits and pieces of this book as well. And you can go into there, and that might lead you down another pathway. So yeah, it can be kind of taken in all different bits. James is in here.
Oh, wow.
James.
Yeah, I'm going to forget James' name. I still feel bad about that. Sorry, James. I will hug you when I see you. I'm going to put James on the podcast as well.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And James has a new book out on the human foot. So if you're really interested in the foot anatomy, you know, go take a look at that and have him. Have him.
I have it. It's great. So I can verify for that. Yeah, he's a genius. And I will never forget James Searle's name again.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, Lauri, thank you so much. And so where can people find you?
Actually, wellnessbridge.com. So www.wellnessbridge.com usually has where I am. I do work with people virtually too, in all different areas of movement and anatomy study and all of that. I'm going to be doing some dissections again with Leslie Kaminoff of he wrote Yoga Anatomy. We're going to be doing focus on the breath, particularly. We have 2 labs coming up in June. There may be some
I'm going to
things.
interrupt you now, because I saw a video, 4-minute video on breath from dissection with no sound. I wanted to hear what you said.
I know I was always going to overdo the sound. We do have that as part of a whole package that we did a filming the first time I did lab with Leslie. You can buy that for like $100, keep it permanently. So if you want to hear me babble on, you can hear that. I was going to do more clips and then talk over that. So
sounds like something's wrong with my computer. I know she likes to talk.
No, I know. I do like to talk. So
I know that.
I'll have to get that dubbed over really soon.
It was a great video, though.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah, that shows, and that's unembalmed tissue. So obviously it shows the lungs inflating at different levels of taking off different of the myofascial layers. So
it's incredible.
An interesting clip. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm here working with Nick Backstrom, a pro hockey player here in Washington, and him and I was watching. He's like, wow.
Cool.
I mean, just to see the differences in how big the right lung versus the left lung is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, and I've been doing, because Leslie Kamenoff's big thing is breathing. He had the breathing project in New York City for years and years. So last couple of times I've, co-done things with him. I've been dissecting to look at the diaphragm and all different angles and how that relates to everything else. So yeah, more to come.
More to come. Great. Well, last question. Will you do any more with Todd Garcia or Tom Myers?
Not right now, but
Okay.
I've been friendly with everybody, and we parted ways just during the pandemic during these times. So I just saw Tom recently at the Fascial Research Congress. It was great to see him again.
Yep.
And you never know, things come
know.
around in different places. So.
Yeah, because I have different courses in Sweden, and I know many are really interested to go and do dissection courses. So,
well, I'm being potentially brought into a couple projects around the States, and if there is a place or medical facility that you want to bring me over to you, I would come and do that, and we could talk.
That would be amazing.
So yeah, just we'll figure that out.
We figured it out. Hey, Lauri Nemetz, thank you so much. This has been tons of knowledge. This is so much information. So I guess you have to listen to this one at least 15 times.
And buy the book.
And buy the book. Buy the book. And maybe you can, because you've been name dropping a lot in this episode, maybe you can send us like the most important, if you remember, the most important ones, the names and links to maybe articles or websites or whatever, so we can post that on the text.
I'll do that within about a day. Probably by the time you get this up, it will be there for your listeners and all of that. I'll have my website too, and all the names of people like Robert Schleip, Jan Bilke, all those good guys. Yeah. That
would be amazing. Hey, Lauri, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Let's do this again soon.
Yay, definitely.
Thank you so much.
So good to see you.
Thank you so much. You too.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.